Another group that used the workhouse and that interested me were women. The workhouse traditionally was a refuge for the elderly and the infirm, but it was also a temporary shelter for people with children, somewhere to spend the night. Deserted women could seek shelter here. Very often, although they weren't supposed to, if their husband was seeking work elsewhere, the women would claim they'd been deserted, and therefore it was up to the boards of guardians to look after them while the husband was off in Scotland looking for work. Other women were actually deserted, and it's very hard when you're looking at the registers to sort of differentiate between genuine cases and slightly less than genuine cases. Some women were pregnant and single, and basically had to find shelter and maybe somewhere that they would have their baby. And we'll come back to that shortly. The regulations surrounding desertion were funny though, because some pauper women were actually able to use the poor law as a means of revenge on a wayward spouse. In November 1876, it was reported, we go back to the Board of Guardian meeting again, a woman sought relief, basically so that a warrant would be issued for the arrest of her husband because he had run off to Manchester with a younger woman. The chairman, it was reported, addressed the applicant by saying, I quote again, "You have told me your husband has deserted you and you are working at Ballinamore Mill and you want outdoor relief or admission to the house, but some of the guardians think that perhaps you're better off without your husband." And she replied, "I would want to get him punished for what he's done to me. That's what I'm here for." The chairman later remarked again, the husband would be liable to 3 months imprisonment if they got him, and she said, yes, if I thought he'd be caught, that's what I want. So she was actually prepared to enter the workhouse just so her husband could be arrested. Other women with illegitimate children would tend to use the workhouse, and this is one of the groups that would be in and out of the workhouse a lot. Here's an example, Jane C., who used the workhouse regularly. She's described as a mendicant, she's 41, and she has got 2 children, and she's admitted on a regular basis, sometimes on her own, sometimes with her 9-year-old daughter, and sometimes with her daughter as well as her 14-year-old son. They were coming and going all the time, and for women such as these, who were often ostracised by society, perhaps the workhouse was one place where they could find some shelter. In some of the larger cities, particularly Belfast and Dublin, there were many alternatives to the workhouse. Magdalenes, asylums, laundries were run by the main churches. But for people living in more rural areas such as Ballymoney, who were perhaps reluctant or unable to travel, or an alternative such as that wasn't maybe a possibility. And also, as has been pointed out by Maria Luddy, for example, a scholar who's looked at this in some depth, these institutions tended to be run on very strict terms. For example, a woman with an illegitimate child or who's single and pregnant would have the child taken away whenever they were admitted to one of these asylums. Whereas in the workhouse, there was a degree of freedom and they were able to keep their children, and whenever they were discharged from the workhouse, the child went with them. So who knows, perhaps for some women that was a very important consideration. But we do see that women used the workhouse over and over again. Annie M is another example. She was 25, she was single. She was admitted to Ballymoney Workhouse in December 1890 with one illegitimate child who was 5 years old. And she was also pregnant when she was admitted, and she had her baby 3 weeks later. They stayed in the workhouse for 4 months. All 3 were then released at the end of April. Within 3 weeks, however, all 3 were back in the workhouse, and they stayed for another 3 years. Finally, all being released on the 17th of April 1894. The Ballymoney guardians could and did provide various forms of relief to these women who were regarded by society in general and by the local government board as immoral and therefore undeserving. And there was a great debate at the time as to whether women such as these actually deserved relief at all. For some of the women of Ballymoney Union, however, the workhouse did offer a degree of choice. However unpleasant an environment it might be, it at least provided a place of refuge for those who had been ostracised. So, reviled as it has been as an institution, there is no doubt that the workhouse did play a useful role in society as somewhere to offer shelter for the night, somewhere for the poor families to stay on their way through, somewhere that the poorest class of women could turn to. There might be a stigma attached to it, there was, but for some they made the pragmatic decision to use it as one of their strategies for survival. The study of the records of the poor has thrown up fascinating insights into the way in which the poorer classes of any particular area live, the choices they make, their strategies for survival. So from this point of view, these records are particularly useful in establishing more about a class of people for whom very few historical records actually exist. In addition, however, if we go beyond this to look at the management of the poor law in any area, we can learn much about the social, political and economic structure and the prevailing attitudes in that area. In the case of Ballymoney, the administration actually comes across as much more liberal than in other parts of the country. While the landed class dominated many boards of guardians, in Ballymoney we see the merchant and the larger farmer being elected to positions of authority, and we see women taking a leading role in this important form of local government. Poor law records have a tremendous amount to tell us about any area, so I hope you enjoy your search. Thank you.